Hello everyone, welcome to the podcast Thinking with T.
I'm speaking to a friend. Her name is Saskia Hoffman. She's a scientist. She has a PhD in the food sciences, and she's German. She's married to a British Nigerian. His name is Ola. They live in Copenhagen. Essentially, this conversation came about because Saskia posted a link on Facebook regarding the murder of George Floyd in the United States and the need for white people to work towards ending racial discrimination. That sparked a sort of conversation from, on Facebook, and we said, okay, you know what, let's have a conversation on here and try to understand that a little better. So, Saskia, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you very much.
Okay.
Very happy to have the conversation.
Okay, nice to be talking to you as well. So, in terms of the article I was referring to, can you just explain what your thoughts are generally? I mean, a bit more broadly.
I'm trying, to be honest with you, I'm trying to remember exactly which article it is because it feels like in the last couple of days, weeks, maybe even already, I've been reading a lot into racism in the US, but also what it is in Europe, and so on and so forth. So I think if I remember correctly, the article was essentially really calling for for everybody to be involved when it comes to ending racism, and for white people to really not just be quietly against racism, but actually recognize what privilege we have currently almost everywhere, I guess, and how that is not fair, and what everybody really can do about it, and realize actually that there is a problem, because I think that is, at least in Europe, from my perspective, still the biggest thing, that people don't even think that we have a problem.
That's very interesting, because I speak to some other people, sometimes maybe not speaking to them directly, probably reading some other people's opinion, Europeans and some other Black people alike as well. And people say things like, there's nothing like white privilege. But you're saying that, yeah, it does exist. Why do you think it does? Do you have, I mean, do you have examples from your own experience to show that, yeah, there is something actually called white privilege? Why do you think it exists?
I mean, I think the best way I can talk about it is from the German perspective, because I guess that's where I've lived most of my life. I've spent 4 or 5 years in the UK, and so I'm not sure how much I can comment on the UK as such, but I know in Germany, it might, maybe it's not just white privilege, it's the privilege of being a German and having a German name that makes it certainly easier for you to get an interview, for you to get an apartment. That is, I mean, I don't have numbers for it, because interestingly, I also only found out recently Germany doesn't actually collect much data about ethnicity in Germany. So
Okay.
quite hard to get numbers on that. But it's being in Germany with Ola, being in Germany with a Black person, and I am from a rural area. People look. Nobody ever looks at me. Why would they? I'm white. Everybody else is white. I don't stick out. I can disappear. As a Black person, you can't. People rarely ask me where I'm from, because why would they, right? I do look like I fit in. I can fit in the UK. I can fit it in Germany, in Denmark. Doesn't really matter. So appearance doesn't make me stick out because I'm white. So that's a privilege. I never, before being with a Black guy, and before having more and more friends that are Black, I never really thought about skin color, which I bet is different if you're a Black person.
Yeah, the experience is obviously different. I remember my first time coming to the UK. I'd lived in Nigeria all my life. The farthest place I'd gone to was Benin Republic next door.
Mm.
Obviously, everybody is black out there, so yeah, so you'd never really think about color in that way. Then
No.
until I came to the UK, and then I came out of the plane in Heathrow, and wow, then I was sticking out. I was like, okay, okay,
Yeah,
okay. And that's the UK where you still have
a
a
decent
sizable number
proportion.
of
Yeah,
black people as well. And so
yeah.
yeah, so
I
I
mean,
think you have
I had the experience when I went to Nigeria, right? It was totally the other way around. I was the one who was sticking out all the time. Um, but it's different because people, I mean, people are essentially like amazed at you and probably happy, and you get loads of smiles when they see you.
okay.
Um, don't necessarily get all the smiles when you're a black person walking around
Yeah,
between a bunch of
yeah.
white people. So of course it's this. I've been looking a lot into biases and how, unconsciously our mind is wired in a way that we put people into categories. That's just how our brain works, and so we of course use how people look to identify if they are similar to us or not. And of course, skin color plays a big role in that. And I don't think that's necessarily a problem. I think what is a problem is that over time, with all the history we have, with slavery and so on and so forth, somehow we end up in a situation that if you think of white, you think of positive attributes, and if you think of black, you think of negative attributes,
Negative
generally
attributes.
speaking.
Oh.
And that's a problem. And then, of course, I have an advantage because I'm white, so of course I must be a nice person, which, bullshit as well. But
Shouldn't be.
no,
Yeah, because I mean the idea should be that people should be judged by the content of their character, not by how they look, just
yeah,
by
if we ever get there, I don't know. But it's
but again, in terms of your own experience, now
mm,
you're actually married to a Nigerian
mhm,
guy. You're living in Copenhagen, which I know is a majority white city,
yeah,
obviously.
definitely.
So what's been your experience with him,
Um,
since being married to a black person in that way, associated with a black person?
um, here, I mean, I have to say, here in Copenhagen, it's a major city. You don't feel much. I think what I felt when we've been going to Germany, so to my parents, which is a rural area, people are amazed. Uh, People look at you quite skeptically, maybe scared, maybe like, what the hell are they doing? And the thing of getting looks is something I only get because I'm with him, because I'm with a black guy. I didn't
Mm.
get looks before. I mean, not that it bothers me, but it's something, it makes you realize. And I think that's why I'm also feeling for a lot of white people who are kind of waking up and going like, what do you mean I'm privileged? I'm just like, yeah, you probably never went around with a black person and have seen what it's like to be looked at and stared at. I mean, we had incidences where he is, or most of the time, he is the only black person around by far. And that's something that took some getting used to, coming from the UK, where you are. I mean, of course, there are not everywhere a lot of black people, but in
But
Nottingham,
there's
where we live,
still
right, there's a good
sizable
amount.
number.
Exactly. And then going to rural Germany was like, wow, okay.
What is this guy doing here?
Exactly. And you put on top of that in that region now, over the last, what is it, 5 years now, we also had quite a number of refugees coming in. So the society is changing, and people are very skeptical, afraid. Um, people are not yeah, that used to seeing people that are different. At least in my region, that is
From them.
still quite recent. Difficult to believe, but that's what it is. We had
But in that case, I mean, in that case, is it fair to judge someone, look at a white person now who has never interacted with whether an Indian or, I mean, everybody's seen around him all his life, all our lives, where people who looked like them, and then suddenly you have a situation where you're getting more people who look physically different. I mean, who have different physical features in terms of their color. Uh, I think isn't that normal that such people will be, a bit that will be the reaction to them. I mean, is it okay to judge them as, I mean, racist, quote and unquote now? Is it okay to judge them? Shouldn't one cut them some slack, like, okay, yeah, I understand you've never experienced this before. This is a new experience for you. I mean, it will be similar to Things Fall Apart. Yeah, it's probably one of the biggest books out of Nigeria. Now, I described pre-colonial Africa, and then you had a situation where people were seeing white people for the very first time in their lives. Their grandparents had never seen a white person. And then suddenly, I mean, it was strange to them, and they were, probably these guys must be some demons or some gods or something. Now, if you spin it around as well, isn't that the same reaction that these guys are having?
maybe to an extent, because I mean, come on, we're in the 21st century. There is internet, there's everything. So it's not like they've never. I mean, it's not that they don't know that black people, people of color exist.
Exists.
So of course they know that. I think it is more about it's I think it's more about then skepticism. Like, I mean, of course you can look at people, but it's also the way they look, the way they stare at you persistently, where you're like, come on, I mean, yes, I might cut you some slack, and okay, you are not used to people, but there's also a proportion of people who never had any of these thoughts, or maybe had these thoughts but not reacted on them. Like, I mean, my family is not used to having a black guy around either. I never had any challenges with my, with friends.
Yeah, that's another question I would actually like to know. What was the reaction of your parents, your family, like to when you introduced Ola to them and say, "Oh, I'm marrying this Nigerian." Ola is British Nigerian, right? Or is it Nigerian
Yes.
British? Is there a difference? Okay, British
Yeah,
Nigerian.
don't ask me
Obviously,
that.
it's black anyway.
I
What
think
was
for
their
me,
reaction like to that?
um, curiosity, I guess, is maybe the best way to put it. Because I mean, my parents, my family, they are amazing. They're very open-minded, and despite having lived more or less in the same place all their life, that they don't judge people based on looks or stuff like that. So it's more about getting to know him, and they got to know him, and it was never an issue. I mean, of course, you then have more the jokes about what is different between black people and white people, and things like that, but in a jokey way, in a way of, okay, we're kind of exploring, we're learning from each other, and we're getting to know each other. But it was never like, oh yeah, no, you can't be with a black guy. No, never.
Oh, that's quite interesting, really, because sometimes I mean, I'm married to a Nigerian, and sometimes I think about it. If I were to, be married to somebody of a different, okay, I
Right.
wouldn't say a race, where it's just one race, yeah,
Yeah.
of a different color, a different culture, what would the reception have been? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe, maybe in another life I'll
Well,
find that, really, but
and
I
and
really
if
don't know.
we're talking about Nigeria, it might already be a problem if you're marrying somebody who is not Yoruba, or who's not, the right group of
Yeah,
Nigerians.
that's another thing because
It's
personally for me,
crazy.
when the question of racism comes up and is being discussed, because I'm from Nigeria, I mean, and my experience is obviously there's no single black experience anyway.
No.
Different black people have experienced life in different ways. The American experience is obviously different from the
Yes.
Nigerian experience. unfortunately, many times in the mainstream media, it appears that the American experience of blackness is being made to be being put forward as sort of the ideal or the be all and of
Mm,
blackness, but that's not totally correct. Anyway, back to my point that as a Nigerian, for me, sometimes I tend to see it more from the angle of, okay, maybe it's just the same thing as the ethnicity and tribalism that I see
mm,
within our culture as well. Now, we are all blacks. I mean, Nigeria is 99.99% a black country, and you still find so much discrimination, so
yes.
much stereotyping of other cultures, other
Mm,
people. And then I begin to ask myself, when these same people, the same person who's being tribalistic, is then complaining of racism, like, can't you see the connection? I mean, it's
yeah.
all the same thing. So sometimes I think maybe it's just it's just something ingrained in the human DNA for us to be discriminatory towards one another. Like, if we were all white, maybe we'll still find a way to
Oh, I'm
say
sure.
that, oh yeah, you have your nose looks like this, mine looks like this, therefore people who have this type of nose,
Mm,
blah blah blah. Anyway, but in terms of back to the question of reception of Ola,
yeah.
when you introduced him to, what was it like, you meeting his own parents, family as well?
Um, that was more, at least on my part, a bit more intimidating because I was very aware that it is not just British, also Nigerian. I mean, right, his parents came
Crossing
to the UK
continents and
exactly. So it's not like they have lived in the UK for generations and came at some point from Nigeria. They are the first who came. And they have, and I say that's probably a lot of Nigerians still still very cultural. They're still very aware of we are Nigerians. Depending which context, of course, you then switch to be more British. But so for me, I knew, okay, this is very different to anything. I mean, for Ola, having lived in the UK for a good amount of time and then going to Germany, the culture is not that different. I mean, yes, there's the language where my parents are not that fluent in English, so we had a bit of language things, but that can all be done. For me, I was like, okay, culture, this is different. But I mean, Ola's family also welcomed me with open arms. I'm learning still. There are things I think I've learned over the years a great deal of how to fit into Nigerian culture and how to adapt around. But from their side, I also never had any problems at all, and his family is amazing. So um, we cannot complain from that side at all.
yeah.
It makes you so much more aware when you are a couple that is both white and black, in this case at least. It makes you so much more aware of what it's like to be the other, or at least as a white person, you just realize what life can also be like. And that's a thing you just don't think about it on a normal day as a white person.
But do you, I mean, obviously you're going to have children by the grace of God, and they'll most likely look somewhere in between yourself and Ola. Is it something that you think about, like, okay, how will my children navigate the world with some mixed race children have people rather that sometimes interacted with? There seems to be these, in which case you're not fully accepted in both communities.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I've thought about definitely, and it's a weird one because yes, you don't fit in either, but then at the same time you fit everywhere if you're yeah have a if you're mixed. So it's a funny one. I have no idea how that's gonna work.
It's gonna pan out.
No, but I mean, but on the other hand, I think the important thing is to give both. Of course, I can't give the black to the British, Nigerian side. That will be down to Ola and to the interaction with his family and other black friends. To say, look, this is where you also belong, and yeah. And I hope that
Yeah.
works. And if you raise kids to be independent and to be proud of where they're from and where their parents are from, and are able to face challenges that come their way like that, then I think that's all the job a parent can do. I have no idea. I can tell you that I have no idea what's gonna happen when they face racism, because of how they look or whatever. I have no idea how to approach that, and the thought of that I find very heartbreaking. But I think it is something that we will most likely will have to deal with in one shape or form. So that I find quite difficult to think of,
Yeah.
rather than the fitting in. I think the fitting in, with interaction and going to Nigeria and being around people that are both white and black. I think that is okay. At least for
Yeah,
me.
I think for people like that, I think one of the things it does is it gives a kind of broader perspective, to life. It's similar to what Barack Obama had. He grew up with his grandparents, his maternal grandparents, and then at some point he went back to Kenya to,
Hmm.
look for it. And I think that gives him a kind of broader perspective to raise to so many issues because he's able to look at multiple contexts in
Yeah.
in understanding worldviews. But anyway, back to that question again as to uh, the article that said, yeah, Caucasians, white people should be involved in ending racism. So on a personal level now, for you, what do you think you should be doing? Because in that conversation, I said, oh, I think that's too retail. But you were like, yeah, too retail, but it's the retails there and there that come together and make the whole. And yeah, I agree with that. So, what do you think you should be doing? What would you think that other people should be doing as well?
I think there is so much to do. Um, and again, I'm speaking here from a German perspective. That with the things happening in the US, the police brutality over there are a lot of discussions, a lot of protests in Germany as well. So um, people are talking about it, but there is definitely a big chunk of the population that thinks it's a problem that does not exist or only in certain parts. And I had that conversation with a family member who was saying, "Oh yeah, but it's only in the east of Germany. In another part of Germany, we are so used to living with immigrants." And I'm like, "Yeah, okay, nice, but how many friends do you have that are not German and white? How many how many colleagues do you have that are not white? Is there actually a mixing of the society going on? Because I think that is a big issue. Uh, so I think for me, a lot of it is talking about it, because I really think a lot of people do not realize what is really going on. People think it's racism if you call people out on the street, if you, I don't know, spit at them, whatever, really nasty,
You
obvious
use
things.
derogatory words on them. Yep.
Exactly, right? So the obvious things, the things that are, I want to say, quite easy to spot, and every normal human being should say, no, this is not right, we don't do this. But I think, at least in Europe, racism is much more subtle, it's much more structural. It's, again, as I said at the beginning, do you get an interview if you have a name on your CV that doesn't sound German or European? Do you get an apartment if you're not German, if you look differently? If we look into the business world, how many bosses, leaders of companies are not white men? It's things like that where I'm like, there's work to do. I'm sorry, but if I see that in some big companies all the cleaning stuff is black, then I'm like, guys, we've got a problem. It cannot be that everybody who's cleaning here is black. This is ridiculous. Because I'm like, what image is it then sending out? That black people can only clean? Really? I mean, no, but I'm not joking. I've seen that.
Yeah, I
And
see that as
coming,
well.
when I came from the UK, I was just like, you gotta be joking. But people here, especially in Denmark, are convinced that there is no problem with racism. I'm like, yeah, right. Have you have you actually spoken to somebody who is not white about that? So I think what I'm thinking where I'm at is that I have I do feel like I have a bit of an insight of what it's like, at least being with somebody who looks different, right? And to at least get an idea of what it's like to experience being the one sticking out. And I think that is a lot of people don't even have a clue about that. They think what they experience is what everybody else has experienced. And that's just not true. I think
Yeah,
for me, there is a lot of talking that needs to be done. Being at home at the dining table, or be it at work, or be it in the pub or wherever you are. I do feel a lot of people still make jokes where I'm like, you cannot say that. This is not a joke. There.
yeah,
So
yeah,
so for me, it's at that level. It's not. I've not experienced things where you're like, okay, we've been obviously attacked in a way, physically or verbally, but it's
verbally.
more subtle. It's more subtle, so it's more difficult to spot if you don't know what you're looking for. And from a white perspective, you don't see these things easily. So that's where, for me, it's talking at the moment. Talking,
Yeah,
listening to my black friends, my black family, hearing what people say, but then also actually talking to people within my circle who are white and go like, guys, no, what you experience is not normal. It's not the norm. If you're a different color, you experience something different. Please realize that. Because I think that's the starting point for me. That's where we need to start in Europe. US is a different, I mean, I don't even want to go to the US. That's too
yeah,
difficult.
and I think that the whole protest thing, and the way that guy's death went viral really has sparked a lot of conversation. I was
Mm,
watching a Facebook live video hosted by some guy. He's a Christian. I think he's a preacher. Yeah, but he's Nigerian. He's British Nigerian as well. And then he had these other white pastors on the platform, and I hardly hear, that sort of conversation amongst Christians in public that way. And they were like, yeah, they were reliving some of their own experiences and saying that, yes, this things is actually true. It actually happens, and so on and so forth. And I think, yeah, that's one of the good things that probably has come out of this whole thing, that, yeah, there's a lot more awareness going on. People are, there's a bit of consciousness,
yes.
but what I don't, is the, and in a bid to correct something, I think we might again get into creating a different kind of problem. What do I mean? Some of the videos I've been seeing online where, I saw this woman kneeling down and kissing the feet of black people, and kind of apologizing
Yeah.
for. I'm like, no, I don't think, I
No.
don't think this is where we want. You've not offended me personally. Why are you,
No. No.
you know? And obviously, there are some black people as well that are actually very, very, very privileged in the world. So
Oh, of course.
to then begin to assume again that every black person is oppressed and in need of some validation. For me, I just don't get that part of it. No.
Mm. No, and
Anyway,
that's also is also not true. I mean, of course, not every black person is oppressed, but um, as a whole, black people have experienced a lot lot more trouble than white people.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think and I think that discussion is an important one to have. But yes, I've also seen that video of people, white people, kneeling in front of black people, and I was like, wow, okay, I don't know, I'm too I was just like, okay, that's yeah, wow. I didn't know what to
Not sure
think.
about these.
No, exactly. I'm like, okay, it would be much more useful if these guys then actually, if they're business owners, look into employing somebody who's black or actually do something. It's a strong symbol, but it's not more than that, and it needs to be more.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so what we've had all these discussion now on race for a while. So I'm very curious to see actions from this and actually say, okay, so what's going to change? What's going to happen? Rather than, okay, yes, we realize that there's a problem. That's a good start, but what are the changes going to look like? I'm very curious to see what and if things going to change.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Thinking with T. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or whichever platform you're listening on now, so you don't miss any of the exciting episodes coming up. Also, I'd like to hear your views as well, so do feel free to send me your voice notes or connect with me on Twitter. See you on the next episode. Bye.